the Triathlon Show 328. Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Dr. Luca Filipas. Luca is a researcher at the University of Milan and an endurance sports coach of professional and amateur runners, cyclists, and triathletes. In this interview, we discuss a recent study that Luca and his colleagues conducted comparing polarized and pyramidal training intensity distributions, as well as how to combine them optimally in a periodized plan. We also get into Luca's coaching methodology, so there's a good mix of very practical and applied things in this interview as well. But before we get into that, big thanks to our sponsors. First, we have Roka. When Roka first got started in 2011, the challenge they set out to solve was to create the world's fastest wetsuit, which in its current iteration is the Maverick X2 wetsuit. 10 years later, in 2021, they set themselves a different challenge, which was to take the extremely high standards of wetsuits like the Maverick X2, but create a budget-friendly version of it that doesn't compromise the standards and incorporates as much as possible of the key features of their flagship wetsuit model at an entry-level price. The result of that is the Maverick wetsuit, which at $275 is a great option for an entry-level wetsuit, but in terms of quality, it definitely does not play in the entry-level leagues. It has top-quality engineering, design, and materials, classic Roka features such as the arms-up technology, patented centerline buoyancy for a better and snappier rotation, Yamamoto neoprene, quick-release ankles, and more. You can read all about Roka's different wetsuits on roka.com, and you can get 20% off your order on roka.com/TTS. And thank you to Zen8. The Zen8 indoor swim trainer is a one-of-a-kind swim bench that helps you improve your technique through an early catch, maximize your propulsion through a more powerful stroke, and stay consistent by doing swim workouts at home even when you can't go to the pool. The Zen8 swim trainer is available in the UK, EU, and the US with free shipping in both the UK and US. It is very affordable, similar to a pair of running shoes, and best of all, the investment is risk-free. If you're not in love with the Zen8 trainer after 2 weeks using it and using their free program, you can send it back and get a full refund. Learn more and get a 20% discount on your Zen8 swim trainer on zen8swimtrainer.com/TTS. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the interview with Dr. Luca Filipas. Welcome to That Triathlon Show, Luca. How are you doing?
Fine, thanks.
So let's start with just an introduction. Can you tell the audience and myself who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm a PhD researcher at the Uni Milan. I've completed my PhD a couple of years ago at University of Milan, doing some research about endurance training. And now I'm mainly a researcher at the University of Milan, but also at the same time an endurance coach for triathletes, cyclists, and runners, both elite athletes and amateur ones.
Yeah, no, that's great to straddle both sides of the applied side and the academic side, and combine them and have them help each other out, have an additive effect of the two. I think that's a really great thing when people manage to do that. So the reason that you're here is that you published a very, very interesting study, which is called The Effects of 16 Weeks of Pyramidal and Polarized Training Intensity Distribution in Well-Trained Endurance Runners. And some listeners may have heard of it already, but let's just take it from the start and discuss some background. So what, at a very high level, what was this about, and why did you come to do this study?
Yeah. First of all, I have to say that this study was really, really difficult to be concluded. Later on, we can explain why. But yeah, this study was an intervention study with a training intervention. So it was pretty difficult to do it because, when you are working with and also do research with high-level athletes, it's kind of difficult to do research in their busy schedule and training program. But coming to your question, I think one of the problem of the previous researches on training intensity distribution was that they just compare different static training intensity distribution. And so in our study, we wanted to compare what happened mixing two different types of training intensity distribution. So
and sorry to cut in, but just for listeners that are not familiar with the term training intensity distribution, can you define that?
Yeah, basically, training intensity distribution is defined as the amount of time that the athletes spend in different zone of training intensity during exercise. So usually, training intensity distribution is defined in three different zones. Zone 1, that is below the first ventilatory threshold. Zone 2, that is between the first and second ventilatory threshold. And Zone 3, that is above the second ventilatory threshold. So training intensity distribution is the time that the athletes spend in one or in all three different zones. So the percentage of time that the athletes spend in these three different zones.
Yeah, very simplistically, you could call it easy, moderate, and hard intensity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So go on, and you were explaining about how in your study you were attempting to use several training intensity distributions, which has not been done before in
Yeah, because the two main training intensity distribution used in endurance competition and in endurance athletes are polarized and pyramidal one. So polarized is a training intensity distribution when zone 1 is the time in zone 1 is higher than time in zone 3, that is higher than time in zone 2, and pyramidal is the time in zone 1 is higher than the time in zone 2, that is higher than the time in zone 3. So these two kind of training intensity distribution are the most common in endurance athletes. I suggest for the audience to read a nice article on this topic that was written by Stogel and Sperlich in 2015, as I remember right. So for the audience, I think it's a good paper to read to be introduced well in this topic. But what was the things that missed in all the literature before our study was that usually the previous study compare polarized one with pyramidal one, polarized one with traditional training intensity distribution, or just a period of high volume with a period of high intensity. But usually when you see a training program, you see a change in the pattern of training intensity distribution from the beginning of the training program to the end of the training program. In this article of Stogel-Sperlich that I mentioned before, they just see a common pattern of endurance athletes of going from high volume, low intensity at the beginning of the preparation to a more pyramidal approach during the pre-competition period, and at the end a polarized training intensity distribution during the competition phase. So this one was just what usually elite athletes do. And so in this article, these two authors reported that usually elite athletes do in this way. So basically, we wanted to check if this approach was right or not. And so check if the elite athletes do in this way, because this is also the the best physiological approach to competition. And so that's why we compare different kind of training intensity distribution, checking if this approach was the best for elite endurance athletes.
And was that paper by Stogel and Spirlich an observational study?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. So just for the listeners, that basically means that they looked at retrospectively at what have these elite athletes been doing, and now what you did, Luca, in your study is an intervention study where you actually take a cohort of athletes and you design different groups and a training intervention, as you say, and then to validate that. So it's a kind of stronger form of evidence compared to observational. So tell us more about the methods, the participants, and the groups and the training protocol.
Yeah, so we recruited 60 well-trained runners. They're pretty good runners. Their VO2 peaks was around 65-70 milliliter per kilo per minute. And so you know that it's pretty high level. Just for giving a time and over a distance, they were between 15 and 16:30 in 5K competition. So they were not elite, but pretty high level athletes. And this is also the reason why I was telling that this kind of study was really difficult to be completed, because do a control intervention for 60 well-trained runner was really, really demanding. And so it's also the reason why this kind of study is not so common to be seen in the literature, because it's kind of difficult to control all the training program for 16 weeks, because this intervention lasted for 16 weeks. These participants were randomized in a controlled way in 4 different groups. One group did all the 16 weeks of pyramidal training intensity distribution from the beginning to the end. The other group, the second group, did 16 weeks of polarized training intensity distribution. So from the beginning to the end, all polarized training intensity distribution. And the 2 other groups did a sort of mix of them. One group did 8 weeks of pyramidal, followed by 8 weeks of polarized. And the other one did exactly the opposite. So 8 weeks of polarized and then 8 weeks of pyramidal. The participants were matched at the beginning of the intervention in these 4 groups, and all the groups did 6 weeks pre-intervention before this 16 weeks intervention, just to make them familiar with the training intensity distribution and also the procedures of the training program. So at the beginning, we did the pre-test before the intervention. We did also the mid-test exactly at the half of the intervention. So after 8 weeks, when the 2 groups changed their training intensity distribution, and then we did the same test at the end. So the post-test at the end of the 8 weeks. The weeks were organized in
and the test was a 5,000 meter time trial.
Yeah, exactly. The tests were 5,000 meter time trial, a blood lactate profiling, and an incremental test to assess the VO2 peak.
Right. Yeah.
So both performance and physiological tests.
Yeah.
The 16 weeks were organized in 4 mesocycle of 4 weeks. So all the groups did 3 weeks of load and 1 week of taper, and then repeat again. So 3 weeks of load and 1 week of taper. But the main difference for the four group were the training intensity distribution. So two groups that did the same training intensity distribution for all the 16 weeks, and the other two that mixed the two different training intensity distributions.
Yeah. And so then I think, was there anything else with the methods, or should we go into the results?
I think just we can mention that the participants trained 6 times per week, and that their training volume per week was around 400 minutes per week. So that's basically what we did. So a kind of similar training program compared to what they really did in their
before the study.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's between 400 minutes, between 6 and 7 hours. So in terms of kilometers, what would that be, like 80, 90 kilometers or something?
Yeah, we're around between 80 and 100.
80 and 100.
Kilometers.
Yeah. Okay. So then in terms of the results, maybe we can discuss first the performance, pure performance in terms of 5,000 meter time trial. What happened there?
Yeah, sure. What happens was that the pyramidal, all groups improved, but one group improved more than the other, and was the pyramidal to polarize group. So the one that started with pyramidal for the first 8 weeks, and then changed to polarized for the second 8 weeks. And this group improved more than the other by around 0.5%. All the groups improve around in a sort of 1.5%, and from pre to post test. But the pyramidal to polarized improve a 0.5% more than the other group in the time trial. And also this happens also to the velocity associated to the two lactate thresholds. So also the velocity at the 2 millimoles lactate threshold, and also velocity associated to the 4 millimoles lactate threshold. So participants basically improved more in the group that mixed at the beginning pyramidal and then polarized. Exactly what Stogel and Sperlich observed in elite endurance athletes.
Yeah. What about VO2 peak? Did that also improve more in that group, or was there no difference?
Regarding VO2 peak, there were no differences between groups. So there were no particular changes from one group to the other one, suggesting that maybe VO2 peak at this kind of level is not a metric that can change just in 16 weeks of intervention. So it changed, but we could not appreciate the differences between group because the changes were really, really, really small from the beginning to the end of the intervention.
Yeah, no, it's something you discuss in the discussion of the paper, I think, with how in similar level of athletes, VO2 peak or VO2 max is generally not the determinant of performance. It can discriminate between very different levels of athletes, but within a homogeneous group, that's not the main thing that determines performance. So,
exactly, perfect.
Okay, so that's really interesting, and we see that both the performance and some physiological markers or the speed at physiological markers improved more in the pyramidal to polarized group, kind of as maybe hypothesized based on that paper by Stogel and Sperlich. So regarding that then, first, we're talking about the performance outcome being a 5,000 meter test. Do you think that is it really important what sort of endurance performance you're preparing for? For example, if you're preparing for a marathon or a half or full Ironman, would results maybe be very different? What's your take on this?
Yeah, sure. I think that will be completely different, but I think this study has a take-home message that intensity can guide the level of fitness of participants. So going from low intensity to a higher intensity from the beginning to the end of the training program, it's the best way to train endurance athletes. Of course, depends the training intensity distribution at the end of the training program depends. I think depends on the intensity of the race. So if you are training for a 5K like this, probably going from pyramidal to polarized is a great option, because at the end you are doing exactly the specific training. So you are doing the polarized training, so the zone 3 training, that is exactly the intensity of the 5K performances races. While if you are preparing for a marathon, you know that the target for a marathon is zone 2. The intensity of the marathon is zone 2. So probably the best option is to go similarly from low intensity to higher intensity, but maybe you must start a little bit lower intensity than preparing for a 5K. With the pyramidal training intensity distribution, and maybe at the end you arrive similarly to a pyramidal training intensity distribution, but with a higher percentage of time spent in zone 2. For example, at the beginning you can start with training 90% zone 1, 10% zone 2, 0% zone 3, or 90% zone 1, 9% zone 2, and 1% zone 3. And maybe at the end, for a marathon, you can arrive at 80% zone 1, 15% zone 2, and maybe 5% zone 3. So you increase the intensity from the beginning to the end of periodization, but of course the pattern will change, because the specificity of the training program should be considered.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that makes a lot of sense what you're saying there. And when you're talking about these percentages, by the way, do you have those numbers in terms of what did the polarized intensity distribution look like from a percentage perspective, and what did the pyramidal look like in a percentage perspective?
So the theory is that during a polarized training, the amount of training in zone 2 is really low. But for our study, we did a sort of real polarized one that also the audience can easily apply. So we just basically do for polarized 80% of zone 1, around 6-7% of zone 2, and 14-15% of zone 3. And for pyramidal, we did 77%, 78% of zone 1, 17-18% of zone 2, and around 6-7% of zone 3. So was a kind of typical pyramidal one, but the polarized one was a polarized one, but we keep a sort of minimum level of zone 2 that was around 5%.
Yeah. And in the paper, kind of what you already discussed a little bit about how the increasing intensity is the way to build fitness or increase performance, I should say. You talk about how that is aligned with the tapering process a bit, or the peaking process is maybe the term you used there. And so can you discuss that a little bit, like what you find aligns with previous literature and best practices around peaking and
exactly.
tapering?
We found that keeping high the intensity also at the end of the training program is a boost for performance, similarly to what found by many articles on tapering. The most ones are from Mujica, that found that a reduction of around between 40 and 60% of volume without changes in intensity is the best way to taper. So we found a similar things here, because during the last weeks of the training intervention, the polarized one keep high the intensity, and so that's why I think they have the greater boost at the end of the training program, because their relative intensity was higher compared to the pyramidal groups. So that's why we thought that the taper was also most effective in the group that changed from pyramidal to polarized, because they not even alter the training intensity distribution, but they also so going from low intensity to higher intensity, but also they have a higher intensity at the end of the protocol, and with the reduction of the volume at the end of the protocol, they could have boost their performance better than the pyramidal group. So I think this one is one of the message that can be take home from the audience. You have to increase the intensity from the beginning to the end, and also keep the same intensity also at the end, just reducing the amount of volume before your race to be fit enough to compete at your best.
Yep. What about when considering how this applies to a year-long periodization? So we were looking at 16 weeks, which is already a very long and good period, of course. But maybe it wouldn't work the same if you try to do, let's say, 25 weeks of polarized and 25 weeks of pyramidal and 25 weeks of polarized. You would maybe have to break things up into different parts of the season. How do you think that? What is a time frame that you can use this sort of approach? And should you take like a season break, or like at least some bigger recovery week?
I think you must decide at the beginning of your season how many peaks you want during the season. So I think the two most common ways to peak are the 2 peak. So 2 peak in a season or 3 peak in a season. And so I think you must break your season just immediately after your peak. So you're going from low intensity to higher intensity, peak, and then do a transition period, and then restart with the base period. So with low intensity, high volume training, and then restart your preparation. I think you must recover after 8-9 weeks or 8-9 months of preparation. I think you cannot prepare for 12 months for a race that's come in 12 months. You must break the season in shorter period, otherwise it's too long, and the risk of overtraining or injuries are really high. So you must break up your season in shorter period of time. So I think peaking 2 or 3 times in a season is the best way to do this.
Yeah, I think the 2020, when the COVID-19 lockdowns first started, was a really interesting case study in this. When for some athletes, I mean, for everybody, races were gone for a long time. But some athletes had actually ended up with a lot of time to train and not much else to do. So and personally as well, I had a lot of time to train, no races. So it was just really interesting to see, okay, how long can you keep training and try to build fitness? And at what point does it stop being effective and you have to basically take a rest, even if you don't have that race? You have to treat it as if you had a peak and then really rest and start over again. That was, for me as a coach and an athlete, it was quite eye-opening and a good lesson to learn from that year.
Yeah, sure. And also I think another things interesting about the COVID period was that and the lockdown period was that doing a really big period of training without racing for also elite athletes was really useful, because usually they spend a lot of time in racing and also recovering from racing and traveling to the race, and doing this block without racing, I think was really useful for them to do a good base and then do a great result during the summer, because you know that for the case of the Tour de France, they just recorded many record on the climb in that year, and they came from few races. So I think it explained well how is it important to do a right and a long base at the beginning of the preparation before going into competition.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's discuss a little bit more around what we kind of touched on already, with VO2 max not being that good of a marker to discriminate between athletes of a similar level. Why is that the case? What is the mechanism why that's not important, but you can look at maybe things like velocity at 2 millimoles or velocity at 4 millimoles, and they seem to be better markers of performance? Can you discuss your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's easy to explain to the audience, because VO2 max is a metric that measure the maximum amount of oxygen that you can use during exercise, and so it's a sort of measure of your engine. So your power of your body, and so I think it's not the best metric for long endurance competition, because you know that the velocity associated to VO2 max, or the power associated with VO2 max, is you can keep this velocity or power just for few minutes, just 5-6 minutes. And so it's not so important, because usually you don't need, you never need this power or this velocity when you do longer competition. You just need to go at the highest percentage of VO2 max for the longest time possible. So if you are doing a marathon, you are trying to use the best fractional utilization of VO2 max for that time of the marathon. So, for example, if your VO2 max is 80%, 80 milliliter per kilo, sorry, and during your marathon you are never reaching 80 milliliter per kilo, but you're running lower, at a lower value of VO2, and then your aim is to try to run at a higher VO2 than another runner that has the same VO2 max than you. So that's why VO2 max is not so important. It's really important for shorter races. So I mean, for 50,000 meters, it's really important. But if you are going to a longer race, is less important. Of course, you cannot be an elite athlete with 60 milliliters per kilo, because you know that for running at 2 hours and 5 minutes for a marathon, you need a higher VO2 for the marathon. So if your limit is 60 milliliter per kilo, you know that you cannot reach that level. But when athletes have an enough higher level of VO2 max, the things important are the thresholds, of course, the fractional utilization of VO2, and also the economy of the movement. So cycling economy, running economy, skiing economy, and so on. So that's why it's basically important to have an high VO2 max, but is even more important when you have this high VO2 max, also to have high threshold, high fractional utilization, and high economies.
Yeah. And what past guest of the podcast, Michael Rosenblad, actually talked about how maximum aerobic power or maximum aerobic speed, so basically the power or speed associated with VO2 max is a lot better as a marker, because then you kind of take economy into account. So he suggested that could be a good testing tool for athletes. You don't even need to know your VO2 max, but if you can easily do, especially on the bike when people have a smart trainer at home, it's very easy to do a ramp test to get your maximum aerobic power that way, and that can be a great way to track changes in your engine, even if you don't know your exact VO2 max. If you know your maximum aerobic power, then that's even better because it takes a bit of that economy into account.
Yeah, exactly, and also because you really don't need any kind of number. You don't need to know if you have 75 or 78, 74. If you're able to do 300 watts for 60 minutes, and then you are able to do 350 watts for 70 minutes for 60 minutes, you know that you are getting better. you know that.
Yep.
It's kind of simple. you don't know. Yep. Of course, the VO2 max will be improved if you move from 300 for 60 minutes to 350 for 60 minutes. You know that your VO2 max
yep.
is improved, but you don't need to know the number. It's just not needed for train better.
Mm. So let's get into some other training questions. Or is there anything else with this study, by the way? If you want to highlight one or two take-home messages or repeat one or two take-home messages for the audience, what would that be?
Yeah, so the first one is that for this kind of competition, so 5K competition, and also we can extend to middle distance competition, moving from pyramidal to polarized seems a good way to improve performance. The other more general take-home message is that going from low intensity to higher intensity from the beginning to the end of periodization is the best way to improve the performances. And I think also the other take-home message could be that for this kind of competitions, so endurance competition, both middle and long, you didn't need to have changes in VO2 max to improve performance. So some maximal changes in performance are enough to improve overall performance.
Yep. So then going to some more training and coaching questions, because as you said at the beginning, you are also coaching a number of endurance athletes, both professional and amateur, in different sports. So just a very general question at first. What is your coaching methodology like, if you were to describe it?
Yeah. I usually train based on the evidence of the literature. So what we found in the study was exactly what I usually do in my training. So I'm usually doing a really good base. I'm really a fan of a solid base. As you know, you had in your podcast as a guest Inigo San Milan that talk about the importance of zone 2 in the 5 zones. Zone 2, so is zone 1 if we look at 3 zones model. The importance of zone 2 training, so the base training. And so I'm a really fan of doing really high volume, low intensity at the beginning of the preparation, and then move to specific training intensity, going from the base to the peak of performance. So this is my approach, training philosophy. And I'm also trying to apply a sort of micro periodization in my training program, because I believe that a fixed approach, doing 3 weeks of load, 1 week of taper, 3 weeks of load, 1 week of taper, is just overrated. And I think you must check when the athletes need recovery based on metrics like HRV or RPE or perception of fatigue, or different kind of metrics that you can check. And then you can give a short of couple of days or 3 days of taper, and then you can start again to do a block of training. It's a sort of periodization, because I think that it's overrated, the overcompensation that people think that happens at the end of the taper period. I think if you do a high intensity training today, do a couple of days of easy training, your body is again ready to at the top level, at the maximal level, to reach another stimulus, and so I do another high intensity training. So I don't see the need of doing a fixed period of taper. Just do during the weeks, for example, 1 week of high load, like high intensity training, zone 2, zone 3, then 2 days of easy training, where the body can recover and you can get the adaptation from your previous high intensity training, and then you are able again to do and your body is ready to from a biological perspective to reach and to keep the intensity and to adapt from that training. So I'm basically doing one day of high intensity, 2-3 days of taper or easy day with mainly zone 2 training, and then another one of high intensity, and going in this way till the athletes is reported to be in a situation of overreaching or just fatigue, and then I give a couple of more days of recovery and then start again. So I don't have a fixed approach in periodization, just really changeable kind of periodization.
How excuse me, how long do you find it takes on average for until I guess there might be a very big variability, but is it typically 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 1 week until an athlete, an average athlete, gets to the point where, okay, now we need those extra days of rest? What do you find?
Yeah, I think it's really really, the variability is really high. So that's why I'm going in this kind of approach, because I think you cannot standardize the timing of the taper of the week of low load, because it's different. Not only for the training program and the training characteristics or the characteristic of the subject that you have, of the athletes that you have, but also it depends also on the on what the athletes do in their life, in his life, besides training. because usually we consider training, for elite athletes it's mainly that, but many amateur athletes maybe do 30,000 steps each day, and maybe another one do just 5,000 steps each day, and this makes a lot of differences in how their fatigue at the end of a training program, at the end of the week, just basically. So this variability depends not only based on the characteristic of the athletes and the training program, but also from what the athlete is able and how the athlete is able to recover from the sessions. I mainly see that, of course, runners need recovery a little bit more than cyclists and swimmers, because the impact and the loads of the during running is higher than during cycling and swimming, because of the impact with the terrain. So that's why I think runners usually need maybe after couple of 3 weeks they need recovery. But I have seen swimmers doing perfect kind of micro-periodization for 6 or 7 weeks consecutive without having any kind of perception of fatigue. So it's kind of really variable from one athlete to the other, and also from disciplines, and also, as I said, from what an athletes do during their daily life. I have just read an interesting article that I can suggest to the audience from Sperlich, and where they compare the training intensity distribution of an athlete during the training and during the all 24 hours, and they see really differences in the training intensity distribution from one athlete to the other athletes doing the same training, if they compare the training intensity distribution during their life. So they just spend really a good amount of time in zone 2 during their normal life. Of course,
zone 2 in a 3-zone model or in a 5-zone model?
In a 3-zone model. Yeah. So just running for take the train, or just coming from the doing the steps to come to their apartment. And so
really,
yeah.
I'm very surprised to hear that. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. They were amateur athletes, but it was really interesting. So they were supposed to train exactly in the same way, but one athlete do completely nothing. I'm just comparing two of them. One athlete did completely nothing during their resting time, and the other one was doing like 40,000 steps with around 2 or 3% of zone 2 accumulating in their resting time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, so to clarify, what I was really surprised about was that they accumulate time in zone 2, but of course it makes sense that some people have the type of day to day that they are doing a lot of active things, a lot of steps and so on, as you say. I just assumed that most of that would be in zone 1, and it sounds like most of it still is, but there can still be a fair amount of zone 2 in there that of course will also have an impact. I think those are all great points, and definitely it makes sense that when you compare amateurs and professionals, for example, that on average probably the professional will be able to go on for much longer without needing a break. But then of course it depends as well on how much you overload their training. What we talked already a bit about the different type of training for different distances, like 5K versus a marathon. But other than what you already mentioned, is there anything else that you think is important to highlight when in differences in training for different events of different duration?
Yeah, well, I think we can mention just a couple of things. Of course, volume matters, of course, when you think about different kind of disciplines. I think volume is a really, really important variable for training. So I think change from 5K to marathon, but I think it needs to be high also in 5K runners compared to marathon. So I think volume is a really key indicator of performance for endurance athletes. So I think it matters when you compare different kind of athletes. And the other thing that I think matters when we talk about different type of races, I think the specificity of training program, of the training of the race intensity. Sorry. So I think you must train a lot at your specific race intensity. Of course, mainly during the specific period, so the pre-competition or competition period. And I think one of the best way to go for it is to start with small intervals at your race pace, and then try during the specific period, try to extend the intensity. So try to do longer intervals at the same speed at as the race. So for example, for a marathon, you can start from at the beginning 4 times 3K at your marathon pace and arrive at the end with 6 times 4K at your marathon pace with maybe 1K of recovery in between. So just extend the intensity, or even you can start also with 5 times 2K at your marathon pace and then arrive at 6 times 4K at your marathon pace. But you know that just starting from 4 times 3K and then arrive at 6 times 4K, or even better 4 times 6K at marathon pace is a good approach, I think, to train the specific intensity of the race. And this is one, I think it's really important in when we talk about endurance competition, specifically in running, because running is when you run at an even pace. So that's why it's so important to extend the ability to do this pace, because you know that running is done at an even pace. In cycling is kind of different, and so I think it's also important to do short intervals, more short intervals than running, because you know that the changes in power are really, really often happens often in cycling, and more way more than running.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I also think that in cycling, you are fixed in your position and you have a fixed movement pattern. Whereas in running at 5 minutes per kilometer is a very different movement pattern than running at 3 minutes per kilometer. So actually, it's almost like not different sports, but definitely very different demands on the neuromuscular system. So it makes really sense that to be efficient in running, especially, you have to train a lot at your race pace. In cycling, it's maybe less important because all the cycling you're doing is at the same is the same range of motion, the same movements, and more or less the same neural patterns, I would guess, although of course the amount of muscle fibers you recruit will impact that as well, but the movements themselves are the same.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. You can change your gear and just do the same cadence also for different watts, And in running, you cannot do this. If you are running you can change the cadence, but it's a kind of different things about compared to cycling, of course.
Yeah. So then one final question on training, a very general question. If you can give 3 pieces of advice for the listeners for how to improve their endurance training, their endurance performance, what would that be?
Yeah, sure. The first one is, I think I can say volume. If you are able to increase your volume gradually during your competition your career, your competition career, you are able for sure to improve your performances. So starting from your career about around 100 kilometers, and at the end you arrive at 200 kilometers, for sure you will improve your performance, of course. But so I think you need to maximize your availability in terms of time during doing a lot of volume. Of course, you need to be careful about possible injuries, and so take a look at your biomechanics and see if you are good enough to improve to increase your volume. But volume matters, so you need to take this into account when you're doing your training program. The second thing, I think, when we are talking about training, is to give your body enough time to recover after each interval session. I'm not a fan of doing big blocks of high intensity session, because I think from a biological perspective that your body is not so able to improve when is really, really fatigued. So I think it's better to give enough time to recover after each interval session, each high intensity session, and then do the second or the following high intensity session when your body is fresh and recovered. From a hormonal perspective, bone perspective, muscular perspective, neuromuscular perspective, and also central nervous system perspective. And so I think you need to give enough recovery after each training, each high intensity session. And the third thing is, of course, to start with at a low intensity and move to a higher relative intensity from the beginning to the end of periodization. And doing this, I think it's important to choose the right races during the season to keep to allow the body to do this approach. So from going from low intensity to high intensity. So I'm not a big fan of doing a lot of racing at the beginning of the base period or at the half of the preparation, because I think the races are really, really a high intensity stimulus. So I think they need to be at the end of the preparation. So I think choosing the right competition and putting the right competition at the right time could help you to peak exactly when you need to peak, and not before and arrive at the competition when you are in the down phase of your shape.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point, definitely. And then I want to ask a few questions going back to the academic side. Yeah. First, are you working on any research projects at the moment that you can share anything about?
Yeah. Well, we are working, me and my other colleagues from University of Milan and University of Genova, we are working on determinants of cycling performance, and we are trying to publish a couple of papers on periodization of world-class cyclists, because we have some data from a World Tour team coming from another colleague of Spain, and so we are trying to do a sort of observational study at this time, comparing top 10 Grand Tour finishers in their approach to their Grand Tours. And I can say, just a spoiler of this study, that for these kind of athletes, they really things that help to reach the peak fitness, peak performance during their Grand Tour is how they schedule their race during the season. So usually their intensity going from the beginning to the Grand Tour is increased, of course, as we say, but their sort of putting the higher intensity at the end, and this higher intensity is always associated with races. So for cycling, probably nothing is better than doing intensity during races. So for preparing for a Grand Tour, probably one of the best ways is to keep low the amount of race days at the beginning of the preparation, and just do a block of 2 or 3 stage races in preparation, just few weeks or few months before the Grand Tour, the goal Grand Tour. And so this one is one of the topic that we are trying to cover in our research. And basically this one is the main project that we have, because we have a lot of data from a World Tour team. And then I think the other study have just been published a couple of days ago, and they talk about comparison of junior, under 23, and professional cyclists from a racing point of view. And in a few weeks, we hope that is coming also the training point of view. So we have compared these three groups for racing demands and for training demands.
All right. Yeah, I'll look up that one that was published a couple of days ago and put that in the show notes. And really looking forward to reading that one about the Grand Tour contenders, because that was fascinating. What you said about how the race schedule is a main determinant.
I think it's important, because we want to do a sort of different approach compared to previous researches, because we did a sort of multiple case study with 3 or 4. We have to decide 3 or 4 top 10 Grand Tour finishers, and we just don't want to do means or standard deviation and comparing all these 3 or 4 athletes, but we want to show what these athletes do, and what these other athletes do, because I think it's important for a coach not only to see means, but also to see what an athlete do by himself. So just him, and the approach, the volumes, the training patterns, the distributions, and the races. And so I think it's better to show just each athlete separately from the other.
Yep. Then what's one area of sports science that you use in your coaching that you think is underrated, or that a lot of people maybe don't know about or understand?
I think that probably one of the most underrated area when we talk about research, I think it's low intensity research. I think we have really, really important studies on high intensity training, high intensity interval training, and so on. But we have really few researches on low intensity training. And I think this approach should change. And I'm going to, with my research group, we are trying to think about possible future researches on this topic, because it's about 70, 80, 90% of minutes of your total time that you spend at low intensity, and almost nothing is known about this kind of activity in research. They usually compare high intensity with continuous and this kind of periodization with this other kind of periodization. But few studies have been conducted on low intensity, comparing maybe zone 1 with zone 2 in the 5-zone models, or just going a little bit higher than the first ventilatory threshold, or going just a little bit lower this first ventilatory threshold. What happens from physiological and hormonal and central nervous system perspective? We can just do an hypothesis based on physiology, but really few studies have investigated this topic. So I think this is underrated in sports science, and I think it should be covered during the next few years.
Yeah, that actually answers my next question, which would have been, what's one area of sports science that would help your coaching if more research was conducted? So you kind of answered that at the same time. But following up on that answer that you gave with the lack of research on low intensity training, what do you do in your coaching with your athletes when you prescribe low intensity training? Do you prescribe it very specifically, or if you have a runner, do you just say easy run and let them go off and do their easy run?
No, I just try to of course, with the evaluation test, with testing, I just to try to evaluate the athletes and to check the first ventilatory threshold. And then I think it's important when you do easy training to go below this ventilatory threshold. And I think it's really, really important. And when you have this point, I think it's not so important how far are you from this threshold. Of course, when you, after one high intensity training session, I think you can just recover. So just go below the first ventilatory threshold, and my athletes are usually free to do it even really below the first ventilatory threshold, or just a little bit closer. But when you are far from one high intensity training session, so for example, today high intensity session, tomorrow easy run, so feel free to run below first ventilatory threshold, but choose your pace. You can choose your pace by yourself. The third day, so the following day, I usually prescribe it more specific to be closer to the first ventilatory threshold, so typical zone 2 training, and then again another high intensity or medium intensity session. So I'm basically doing both. Usually after a high intensity training or medium intensity training, I leave the athletes free to go easy, and then the following day, I'm usually prescribing a more closer to zone to first ventilatory threshold training. So a more specific range of watts or pace closer to the first ventilatory threshold.
Yeah. Right. Then let's go into the rapid fire questions. So take one sentence to answer each of these. And the first one is, what's your favorite book or resource related to endurance sports?
It's difficult to reply in just one question, in one sentence. I think I have just received it, but I think the new book of Philip Skiba, Scientific Training for Endurance Athletes, should be the best suggestion for the audience.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes to the interview that I did quite recently with Phil Skiba, where we talk about some of the contents of that book. And then, what's an important habit that you've benefited from athletically, professionally, or personally?
I think I'm honestly thinking about doing research. Helped me to and also doing coaching helped me to I think for both for coaching and research, I think you need to really be a sort of psychologist for your athletes. So I think one of the most one of the habits that you can do in both, you must talk both to participants and also to athletes to get the best training program, and so the best training and the best outcome on your athletes, and also the best link with participants during the studies. So I think the psychological perspective is one of the link between my coaching experience and my research experience. I think it's really, really important in both fields.
Yeah. And finally, who's somebody that you look up to or that has inspired you?
I have to say that my inspiration is one of my supervisor of PhD, and is Antonio Latorre, that is now the head of track and field athletics at the Italian Athletics Federation, and inspired me during my my PhD and my career as a researcher and as a coach. But the other people that inspire me are the most common researcher on endurance training. So Steven Saylor, Stogl, Sperlich, and Mujica, Inigo, Samilan, Dr. Samilan. And so many people, I can recommend many people that inspires me, but probably the mentor of myself is Antonio Latorre.
Okay, well, good to see him. And finally, do you have your own ResearchGate, I think, Twitter, or what are the best places where listeners can follow you and your work?
Almost everywhere. I have a Twitter account that is Luca Filipas, and also Instagram is same Luca Filipas. ResearchGate again, Luca Filipas is not so common, so it's not so common. So
and website as well. I remember now. I checked your website.
Well, www.lucafilipas.com.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I'll put all those links in the show notes and links to your papers that we've discussed as well. So thank you so much, Luca. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I really enjoyed that, and congratulations on the really great study that you and your colleagues did. It's really, as you said, I can imagine it was very difficult to pull off, but you did a fantastic job there.
Thanks again. It's been a pleasure to be here in your podcast. Thanks.
I hope that you enjoyed that interview. As always, you can find the show notes on scientifictriathlon.com with links to Luca's website and social media, as well as ResearchGate. Also links to several studies that we talked about and mentioned. The main study, of course, effects of 16 weeks of pyramidal and polarized training intensity distributions in well-trained endurance runners, as well as studies by Stögl and Sperlich and Treff and colleagues. And also a couple of previous guests on the podcast were mentioned in this interview, including Inigo Mujica and Dr. Philip Skiba. So those two were guests in episodes 256 and episode 311, respectively. So I'll link to those as well. Well worth listening if you haven't done that already. If you are looking to take your triathlon training to the next level, consider looking at our coaching services or training plans on scientifictriathlon.com. If you have any kind of triathlon goal that is important to you, whether it is to finish your first triathlon or perhaps even qualifying for a world championship or qualifying for a pro license, then we are very confident that we can help you out and have a discussion around how best to do that. So please feel free to contact us and discuss further. Next Monday, I interview Dr. Bruce Rogers, who's done a lot of the preliminary research that indicates that it might be possible to use DFA alpha-1, which is a heart rate variability-based measure, to detect where your aerobic threshold is, meaning the demarcation between your kind of low intensity and moderate intensity training zone. So that will be an interesting one. Stay tuned for that. And finally, big thanks to our sponsors, Roka, that you can find on roka.com. Check out Roka's wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, and exceptional sunglasses and prescription glasses for everything from day-to-day wear to extreme action sports. Use the promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS to get 20% off your entire Roka order. And thank you to Zen8. Use the Zen8 swim trainer to improve your technique, power, stamina, and most importantly, your swim training consistency. And get 20% off your order on the swim trainer with a promo code that you can get on zen8swimtrainer.com/TTS. And don't forget, this is a risk-free investment. If you don't love it after 2 weeks, send it back and you'll get a full refund. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.